Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about my eyeshadow palette collection, which is laid out right in front of you right now. This is embarrassing to say, I do have over 80 different eyeshadow palettes. I'm not going to be decluttering anything today. This is simply going to be a collection video. I did just recently post a makeup collection video. But I told you guys in that video that I would be filming a separate eyeshadow palette collection video simply because I have so many eyeshadow palettes that it would have been an astronomically long video. So if you guys are interested in seeing or hearing a little bit more about my eyeshadow palette collection, then stay tuned. But first, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I hope you'll consider doing so before you go. I post videos every single Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday with a couple of bonus videos tossed in here and there. But without further ado, let's jump into my eyeshadow palette collection. Okay, so I'm going to start in the left corner and work right, which I know is opposite from the way we read, but that's just the way I'm going to do it. So up first I have the Sephora Pro Editorial, which I really do like this palette. However, it wasn't worth it for me to buy it just because I don't play with colors that much. Now, the eyeshadow formula itself is actually really good. I do enjoy these shimmers, and the mattes, the few times that I played with a couple of them, have performed really well. I played with a couple of the purples. I am currently trying to pan 3 different eyeshadows in this palette this year, so hopefully I can get some more use out of this one. This hasn't gotten a love for me. I don't know why I purchased this because it was $68 and I just never play with color. I know I purchased it because I wanted to play with color more, but I should have thought before I purchased this. Really nice, luxurious, heavy, sturdy packaging and a really nice palette, but unfortunately it just doesn't get enough love from me in my collection. Moving on to my Morphe collection, first I have the 3502. I have maybe played with this one time, which is really pathetic. So I need to pull this out, even though this isn't the time of year that I necessarily would think to pull this out. But I need to make sure I get some use out of this year in my collection, either that or declutter it, because this kind of just sits in my collection untouched. And then I have the 35V. I ended up picking this one up just kind of on a whim this year. I don't know why, or well, in 2018. I don't know why I ended up purchasing this. It's okay. It's just personally, when it comes to Morphe shadows, there are other shadow formulas I reach for over the Morphe formula, so I just don't find myself reaching into these palettes that much. But I have played with these some. The shimmers are just a little bit underwhelming. The mattes are okay. But yeah. Okay, then I have the original Jaclyn palette. This has gotten some decent love for me. I haven't played with this one in a while. I need to pull this back out. I keep telling myself every single month that I need to pull this back out. So hopefully you guys will see a look from me with this soon. Again, with the Morphe shadows, and the Jaclyn Hill palette is good. I do believe the formula is a little bit better. However, I just still find myself reaching for other shadows over this palette. So that is that guy. And then I do have 2 of the Morphe Jaclyn palettes from the Ring the Alarm collection. This is the Dark Magic palette. I have barely played with this. I don't know why I purchased this one either, just because the colors are not something that I typically would use on a day-to-day basis. So there's a very limited number of times that I could see myself reaching into this palette, and I don't find these shadows to be that easy to work with, the ones that I have. I played a little bit more with her Bling Boss palette, which is the purple toned one. Pretty underwhelmed by this palette as well. Definitely not a favorite of mine. I just mentioned both of these palettes in my top 10 or in my 10 least favorite palettes in my collection. So if you guys want to watch that video, I'll leave that linked. Moving on to Violet Voss, oh my gosh, my lights. I do have 2 of the Violet Voss palettes. This one is the Holy Grail. Yes, this one is the Holy Grail palette. I did end up getting this in my Boxy Luxe in December. I played with it a little bit. I do like this one just because I would definitely, like, the color story speaks to me. These are definitely tones that I would use. So I don't think I'll have any issue using this palette. It's just not the best shadow formula in my collection. The mattes are pretty easy to work with, but I do find the shimmers to be a little bit underwhelming, but still a palette that I do like, at least from what I've used of it thus far. And then I do also have the Violet Voss Like a Boss palette, which I ended up purchasing last year. I like this palette again, but some of the shimmers in here are a little bit underwhelming, which is a bummer. I do like the mattes, and I do like the fun shimmer shades that you get from this. It's just I find the shimmers a little bit hard to work with, and you definitely have to build them up. So those are my thoughts on the Violet Voss Like a Boss palette. Next up is my only palette from Pure. This is the Pure Visionary palette, and I've mentioned before that this just is a palette that I was super excited to buy, but it hasn't gotten a lot of love. Now I have since used it a little bit more, and I do like this. However, it's more of like a satin formula for every single shadow, so it's just different. It's just a different type of shadow formula to work with. It doesn't give as intense or metallic of a finish on the eyelid as it does when you swatch it, so I was a little bit disappointed in the formula, but I have gotten more use out of this since the last time I mentioned that I barely ever use this. Moving on to my ColourPop palettes, this is the ColourPop Perception palette, one of my favorites. I love this palette. I do think, even though it looks like you have a wide variety of choices with this, I feel like if I only go onto this palette, I end up looking with pretty much the same look every time, except for just a different shimmer on my eyelid, because I usually end up using these two shades to go into the crease and then build up the crease, and then I just pop a shimmer on. So unless I'm super creative, I do find a lot of my looks to look kind of similar with this, but I still love this palette. This, I believe, was limited edition. It was in collaboration with Makeup by Shayla, but if you can still get your hands on this, I would definitely recommend this palette. Then I have my Element of Surprise palette by ColourPop. This was the first pressed eyeshadow palette I bought from ColourPop. I do really enjoy this palette. I like that it's mostly neutrals, but then you have these fun pops of color. I find that both the shimmers and the mattes perform really, really well, and I really do enjoy this palette. Then we have the Dream Street palette, which is another one of my favorites. I just love the color story in this palette, and then I love, like, you get these fun blues and fun shimmers to kind of just play with as well. But this is a palette that I take traveling with me often. I almost didn't buy this palette, but thank goodness I did. So happy with this. Such great quality. Would definitely recommend this palette if you guys haven't already purchased it. And then my last ColourPop palette is the Shi palette, and I used to really be a fan of this, but I also just mentioned this palette in my least favorite palettes in my collection. I just don't find that the shimmers perform very well anymore, and I don't really enjoy the way that the mattes look like on my eyes. I just haven't enjoyed the looks that I have created with this. I do intend to put this in my next round of my chopping block series to try and decide whether or not I want to keep this in my collection, but for right now I'm really not reaching for it that much because it is just an underwhelming palette to me as of recent. Alright, next up I have my Milani Bold Obsessions palette, and I love this palette. The mattes in here perform so phenomenally. They're practically like a high-end matte formula. I think they are phenomenal, and then the shimmers in this are just stunningly beautiful. They're so metallic. You don't have to use a wet brush. They build up super easily, and I am blown away by this palette. I believe these retail for $20, but I got mine on sale for like $14 or $15 at Walmart. I know you can get these at Target too. I will link this palette down below because I think it is so worth it. I'll try and link my favorite palettes down below for you guys, but would definitely recommend Milani Bold Obsessions. Alright, jumping into my Tarte palettes. First we have my Love, Trust, and Fairy Dust palette, which I actually really do enjoy. I have panned the shade Frolic in here. It's obviously just kind of like a neutral transition shade, but I love the shimmers in here. I love the color story. I love the mauves that you're left to play with. I've also taken this palette traveling with me. I really actually was surprised by this palette. Really enjoy it. This was limited edition, but I believe you can still buy this, and if you can and you like mauve tone shadows or neutral palettes, I would definitely recommend checking this out. Okay, then we have my Vizier Warm Neutrals palette, and I've said before I'm a little bit let down by the Vizier formula. However, the more I work with this, the more I do enjoy it. I just know when I go in with these palettes, it's typically going to be a little bit more building up, but when I need just an everyday neutral look for work, this is a great palette for me. Or even if I want to use this as like a supplementary palette to other palettes, this works really well. So I don't think it's worth the $80 price tag still, and I kind of wish I had gone with the dark mattes over the warm neutral, but I still have been enjoying this. I had considered decluttering this for a while, and now I'm glad that I decided to keep it. Okay, down here we have my Flower Beauty Golden Neutral palette, and I bought this for a testing like all Flower Beauty products, and I actually really am impressed by this shadow formula or this palette. Now, you're pretty much only going to get shimmery shades or lid toppers out of this, and obviously they all look very similar, but if you really like, you know, just neutral golden or champagne lid toppers for your looks, this is a really nice formula. I'm definitely going to hang on to this through my next declutter when I end up doing my palette declutter, because I do enjoy this so much. We scooted over a little bit so that it's more centered in frame. Let's jump into all of my Huda palettes. So first up I have the Gemstone palettes. This is the amethyst one. I also mentioned the Gemstone palettes specifically out of the Huda Obsessions line in my least favorite palettes, which is funny because the Huda Obsessions palettes are some of my favorites, but I just was not the biggest fan of the Gemstone line. Here is my Emerald Obsessions. I just find some of the glittery shades to be a little bit chunky, and then the mattes a little bit just more difficult to work with. I don't love the way that they blend together, so unfortunately I can't recommend the Gemstones, but I can recommend the rest of the Obsessions. So like I said, the original 6 are some of my absolute favorite formulas or favorite eyeshadows. This is the Mauve Obsessions, which I love. And then I have the Warm Brown, which is also just such a beautiful palette. These are so easy to travel with. You get 9 different shades. You're left with a variety of options for looks, but they're so sleek and compact. Next up, we have the Smokey Obsessions. This was the last one I ended up purchasing out of all 6 of them, because I just wasn't sure if I was going to use this one that much, because it is more cool toned. You have a black that I don't use that much, and then you have the silver shimmery shade, but I also still really do enjoy this palette. Here is the Gemstone Obsessions, the one that was part of her original 6. These are just 9 shimmers, lid toppers, and I really have liked this formula overall. I don't find that these tend to be too chunky, and I like the way that these top over a lot of the looks that I've created, so I actually do really like the original Gemstone palette. Then I have the Coral Obsessions, which I love in the summertime. I took this traveling with me last year to Texas and really enjoyed this one. I do find that I only like to wear this in the spring summer just due to the bright colors, but I do like the Coral Obsessions. And then finally I have my little Electric Obsessions, and I actually really enjoy this palette too. It's a nice little petite rainbow palette. I've definitely used the blue and purple shimmers a lot more than I have some of the other colors. I don't know that I've even played with the yellow or this hot pink, but the other mattes I have used in this one, and they work really well. So really also like the Electric Obsessions. If you're looking for a nice petite rainbow palette, I would definitely recommend checking this one out. I do have a video ranking all of my Huda palettes. If you guys are interested in that, I'll link it below. But next up we have the Tartelette Tease palette, and I just talked about this in a makeup I feel like I got my money's worth out of. At least I hope that video's up before this. This is such a nice little petite palette that it's just easy to create wearable everyday like work appropriate looks, and I've gotten a ton of use out of this. This was in my 2018 project pan. My goal was to pan 3 shades and I panned 4, so I was really proud of my progress on that. And I just love how little and petite this is and easy to use. And then my OG palette in my collection, my Tartelette in Bloom. This has gotten so much love for me. This is such a good palette. I'm considering possibly just buying another one of these because I feel like this one's starting to get old and it's just not performing as well as it used to. However, I've already panned 2 shades in this, and as you can tell, I have significant dips in so many shades in this. I love this palette. I don't think you can go wrong with this palette if you love neutral looks. I just can't recommend this palette enough. I really truly do love and adore this palette. Next up, I have 2 palettes from Studio on the Go, and I believe I got both of these in BoxyCharm. This is the first one. This has a bunch of like neutral toned eyeshadows. This one's gotten a lot of love from me as well. I used to wear this all of the time. I was really surprised at how good of quality this was for being a BoxyCharm palette. I was really happy with it. That previous one was called Warm Up and this one is called Cool Down. I also really enjoyed this one. As you can tell, it has some beautiful purpley mauve toned colors, nice cool toned shades. I really do enjoy this palette too. In fact, I just pulled this into my Shop My Stash, and I'm really excited to get some good use out of this throughout the course of the next month. So really excited to have both of these in my collection. Was happy that these came in BoxyCharms, and they were actually good quality palettes. All right, next up I have the Zoeva Cocoa Blend palette, and at first I was super let down by this palette, but then when I got over the fact that I just don't think the shimmers are very good, and just started to see it as like a neutral tone palette that I could wear to work, I actually started getting along with this palette really well, and I do really enjoy it. Now, I don't necessarily know that I would purchase another Zoeva palette, even though there's a bunch of them that I know are beautiful and really do speak to me in terms of color story. The shimmers in this one did not perform the way I wanted to, so I would be hesitant to purchase another one, but I do really enjoy this palette for everyday work appropriate looks. Then I have my Desi and Katie Dose of Colors Friendcation palette, and I purchased this when it was on sale during the first 21 Days of Beauty for Ulta for holiday season, and boy am I glad that I picked this up. This formula, you guys, is so good. I cannot say enough good things about this palette. I absolutely love it. I think all of the shades are stunning and perform beautifully. I'm really glad that I got this at a discount, and I wasn't going to purchase this otherwise because $55 just seemed like too much. Even though this palette really did intrigue me, I'm so glad that it did go on sale because boy am I happy to have this in my collection. Okay, so then I have all of my Wet n Wild palettes. This is the New Nude palette, which is in my 2019 like pan those eyeshadows, and as you can tell I have panned this shade up here. This is an okay palette. It's not my favorite. I don't love the color story of this one, and I just honestly reach for other shadow or other palettes over this. And then I also have the Rose in the Air, which I've also panned a shade from, but again I just reach for other palettes over this one, even though I do again like the colors. I like the color story of this one a lot, and it is a good quality of shadow for the drugstore, but I just never find myself reaching for this. And then I have the Not a Basic Peach palette, as well as the New Comfort Zone and the Old Comfort Zone. And you guys, I need to reach for these more often. I'm just kind of an eyeshadow snob, so I always reach for higher end palettes before I reach for my drugstore. Alright guys, next up we have my Marc Jacobs Holiday 2017 palette. This is what this one looks like. I also mentioned this in my least favorite eyeshadow palettes, and the reason is because I feel like the mattes just do not perform that well. They muddy together, but I do really enjoy the shimmers in this palette. However, it's just such big bulky packaging that I never reach for this palette, which is unfortunate because the shimmers in here are beautiful. But because of my feelings on this one, I just would never purchase one of the big holiday palettes again unless the color story truly spoke to me. That's another thing about this one. I just feel like it's kind of like a random color story. Like it just doesn't like give me ideas on the types of looks that I could create. I have my two Ciate London Pretty Fun and Fearless palettes. This is the season 1. Both are with Chloe Morel. I loved and still do love this palette. I just haven't reached for it in a little bit. It's such an easy palette to create everyday neutral looks. It looks a little extra beat up because I believe my daughter got into this one a little bit, but a really great palette. I know you can't get it anymore, but I loved this palette. And then I have my season 2, which is currently on my chopping block because I just never find myself reaching for this. I find the shimmers in here to be substandard, hard to work with, and the mattes just don't perform that well for me either. I mean, I've only played with a handful of them, but even though this is more of a rainbow palette, I just do not feel inspired when I look into this. So definitely not a favorite palette of mine. Then I have my Balm Meat Matchmaker, and the first time I used this I was not that impressed by it. However, the more I've used it, the more I realized I really do like it, even just to create everyday easy neutral looks. And I really love this like dirty greeny coppery shade at the bottom here. I think it is such a cool shade, so I actually really do enjoy this palette. If you can get this at one of the times the Balm does their like flash 50% off sales, I would definitely recommend this palette. Next I have my Persona palette, and I say this all the time on my channel, but this is a palette that I love, but it just does not get enough love for me out of my collection. So I currently have this going in my Shop My Stash as well, so that hopefully I can get some more use out of it. Such a good formula, you guys. This is a great palette. I just, for some reason, do not reach into it that often. Next, for my Too Faced palettes, first I have my Chocolate Bar, which is going to end up going in a chopping block, just because I cannot decide whether or not I love this palette or not. This is another one my daughter got into, which is why it looks so beat up, but this palette just does not inspire me. I just don't find myself reaching for it. I just don't feel inspired when I do reach into it, even though it is a decent formula. I just never use this. And then I have my Too Faced Sweet Peach palette, which I do really enjoy. I especially love these two shades down here, and then the shade Luscious up here. I absolutely love. I haven't reached into this palette in a while, but it's definitely a palette that I still do enjoy when I do use it. In fact, I may want to pull this into my next Shop My Stash, because I do it actually I'm one of the ones that really did like this palette. Here is the one Pat McGrath palette I own. This is the, I forget, some sort of Sublime or something. I like this palette, but I was really bummed by this blue shade, which is kind of the reason that I bought it. Now, I was super impressed with this red shade because it's really cool and has like some really awesome shiftiness to it. Plus, I love these two matte shades. I think they're really good. So while I was disappointed in the blue shade, I do still like this palette. I don't think it's necessarily worth the $55, although I'm not gonna lie, I would consider purchasing another Pat McGrath palette just because I feel like the textures and the way that they shift are just so unique to any other shadow formula. If you do like to splurge on shadows, I would definitely recommend just picking out one of the palettes from her that inspires you the most and giving it a whirl. Next, I have my Alomar Cosmetics palette. I do really enjoy this palette. I am currently trying to pan this shade right here, and I love this green shimmery shade as well. The mattes perform really well on this, and I love that you have these fun blues. Now, for me, this isn't a palette that I feel like I can create a complete look with. However, I still do really like this as a complementary palette. And I would recommend this. I think it's a great formula. Next, I have the Grandiose Palette by Ace Beauté, which I got in a BoxyCharm, and I actually really like this palette. You can create some really awesome and beautiful warm tone looks with this. I was blown away by this palette. I wasn't expecting to love it that much, but BoxyCharm came through with another palette, and I really enjoy this. If you can get your hands on this, I'll see if I can link this one, but I would definitely recommend this. I think that the mattes are so easy to work with. They're beautiful shades, and I really enjoyed this palette. Then I have my Urban Decay Born to Run palette. I do love this palette. I haven't reached into this for a little bit just because I've been trying to pan some other shades, but I do really love this and plan to kind of focus on this more towards the summer months. I am currently trying to pan this Riff shade. It's just such a fun palette. I feel like you're left with so many options, similar to the Perception palette. I know you're not left with that many options for mattes, and you're left with obviously more shimmer selections, but this is also a great complementary palette, and I would definitely recommend the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. It also has really amazing packaging. I love the packaging on this, so would definitely recommend this. Then we have my BH Weekend Festival palette, another palette that I absolutely love. I'm currently trying to pan these two shades right here. I love this palette. For $18, you get a mirror and you get so many fun colors. This shadow formula performs so well. I would say it performs like a high-end brand. I just am so blown away by the BH shadow formula. I think they can knock it out of the park. Love this palette. If it's still available, I will link it, and I would highly recommend checking this out. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection. I do have the Kat Von D Serpentina palette. I've been going back and forth on decluttering this one. I just keep it around because I love this teal shade, and for some reason I just cannot get rid of it due to that, even though I've maybe created one or two looks with this palette, which is pathetic. I should just depot that shade. I gotta figure out how to depot. Could be a disaster, but other than that, I never reach into this palette, although these shades are also beautiful. And I no longer, or I haven't been supporting Kat Von D, but obviously I bought this before all of the drama. And then also by Kat Von D, I do have the Metal Matte palette, which I really loved for a long time. I haven't reached into this for a while. I should pull this in to like a Shop My Stash or whatever. I don't know. I really only like some of the shimmers, and I feel super underwhelmed by a lot of the mattes as of late. But for some reason, I just like have memories tied to this when I purchased this, and I was so excited to purchase this palette. So this is like one of those like sentimental palettes in my collection that I just like can't get rid of. But again, there's only a couple shades that I really do like. I know you can't get this palette anymore anyway, but I also finally picked up the Colored Rain Queen of Hearts palette last year, and I haven't played around with this too much, but the times that I have played around with this, I really love this palette. I think it's beautiful. I'm excited to play with this some more. I am currently trying to pan this shade this year out of this palette, and I cannot wait to play around with this palette more. I love the purples in here. I love this red shimmer, and then I love that you have your standard neutrals, which your girl loves over here. Here is my Carli Bybel palette, which you can no longer get. I'm currently trying to pan this middle shade. I also really like this deep shade right here. The highlights in here are also phenomenal. I am blown away again by the BH formula in this. I think it is phenomenal, and I know you can't get your hands on this anymore, which is a bummer, but really happy to have this in my collection. Alright, moving on to my Juvia's Place. First I have the Nubian Mini, which I got in an Allure beauty box. I've used this a couple times. Really do like it. I think it's awesome to have this cute little petite mini that's super easy to travel with. I also have the Deuce palette, which is one of my favorites. I have really been enjoying this Tarte shade up here. I think it is beautiful. I also am trying to pan this in my 19 Shadows in 2019. Love this pink over here. I've created a look using like these 3 shades. I actually have not used the most neutral shades out of this palette, which is pretty funny. I haven't even tried these, but I do really enjoy the Deuce palette. Even though it looks like a confusing color story, I think it's a great palette and one that I would definitely recommend. I do have the Nubian too, which I need to just basically buy a new one because my daughter destroyed this one, but I can still use this, and I do still really enjoy this one. I love the shimmers in this. This Egypt shade is beautiful, and so is this Sheba shade. I also like this one. Like, I also love this. Like, I just love the whole palette. I don't think you can go wrong with the Nubian 2 or pretty much any of the Juvia's palettes. And then I have the Saharan, which I at first was super intimidated by because I just wasn't seeing the whole picture in the looks that you can create, but lately I've been playing around with this and really been enjoying the looks that have come from it. I love this green shade up here. I love this Kaya shade. I love Boro. I love Iman. Soya. I love all of these. The shimmers are great. The mattes perform really well. Then I have the Saharan 2, which I also really enjoy. Again, I really love this shimmer shade. I also really do like the mattes, although this red shade comes off way more pinky on the eyes. And then I love this blue. I'm going to swatch this blue. I just love that blue shimmer shade. It's beautiful. Again, can't go wrong. Love everything by Juvia's. And then finally, I have the Big Magic palette. So this is not the mini, this is the big guy, and I love this one as well. This is probably my favorite shade. It's this really cool, sorry, I know I'm not really swatching shades for you guys, but I just have to with Juvia's. It's just this like really cool shifty purple shade. I've been playing around with this a ton as I've been playing around with purples this year, but I love these teal shades. Really love the Magic palette. Again, would definitely recommend. So Natasha Denona. First I have the Mini Star palette. I was let down by this shade right here. It's the reason I bought the palette, and I felt like that was underwhelming, but I do like the rest of the 4 shades, and this is a really easy one that I can create everyday wearable work looks out of because I just take these 2 shades in the crease and then pop this on the lid. So I actually really like the Mini Star palette. I also really like the Cranberry palette. You are a little limited with what you can do with this, just this palette alone, but I do think it's beautiful. I love the shimmers, and I'm not mad that I own this one. My favorite Natasha Denona palette in my collection by far is the Lila palette. I'm so happy that I have this. I do really enjoy the way the mattes perform in this, but the shimmers are the star of the show for me in this palette. I am pretty much obsessed with every single shimmer. I love this palette. I need to reach into it even more often than I do. I'd love to go into this palette for shimmers just as lid toppers, but yeah, I really love this palette. And then my least favorite is the Natasha Denona Safari palette, which I was so excited to buy. It's an all matte palette. I was super inspired by the color story in here, but I gotta say this was a really huge letdown. I do have a video where I am reviewing this palette, so I'll leave that linked for you guys, but essentially this top row, which I was super excited about, takes a lot of building up to get any sort of pigmentation, and the rest of the 2 rows I feel like just muddied together and don't perform very well. So unfortunately this was a big miss for me. Then we have all of my Dose of Colors palettes. First I have the Snow Angels palette, which I haven't even reached into. I just bought this on sale at the end of the season because I felt like I had to have it to round out my collection, even though I still don't own the cool toned palette from Dose of Colors, but there's the Snow Angels. I also have Marvelous Mauves, which I really do love. Such a beautiful, beautiful mauve tone palette. You are limited with the looks that you can create with the Dose of Colors formula, and you do get a lot of kick up with these, but I still really enjoy these palettes. Next we have Baked Browns, which has by far gotten the most love from me. Again, this is such an easy palette to travel with, and it's so easy to create everyday, neutral, wearable, wear to work looks. So love my Baked Browns. Then I have Sassy Siennas, which I was hesitant to buy because I thought it was so similar to Baked Browns, but then my Dose of Colors, or my Ulta, ended up getting Dose of Colors in store, and I was able to see this in person and realize it's much more warm toned than the Baked Browns, so ended up purchasing this. I've only used this a handful of times, but I loved the looks that I created with this, so another hit in my books. And then finally I have the Blushing Berries, which again I've only used a handful of times, but really enjoyed the looks that I created with this. I just don't think you can go wrong with the Dose of Colors 5-pan eyeshadow palettes unless you're not a fan of like if you despise Kick Up, I would stay away because this is a very powdery formula. We'll end it with all of my ABH palettes. So first, here's my Marc Jacobs 7-pan eyeshadow palette. This is the number 670 Smart Oriel. This is the number 760 Smart Oriel, and it's just a bunch of greens and blues. I rarely ever wear this. I should have known better before I purchased this, but still a beautiful formula. I love this shimmery green shade, and I actually really like the shade on the end here too. I just never reach into this, but I do think the formula is good. Then I have my e.l.f. Mad for Matte palette, and I really do like this eyeshadow formula. I think it's phenomenal for $10, and this is another one that's super easy to travel with, super easy to just have those wearable everyday look, or wearable everyday work look moments from this palette. So would definitely recommend checking this out if you haven't. Then I have my Vizier Petit Pro 3, definitely not a favorite for me and would not recommend. I thought I really enjoyed the colors like story from this, but the shimmers just take so much building up. They're a huge letdown, and I felt like the mattes were not very pigmented either, so wasn't a fan of this guy. And then in my lucky bag for Beautylish this year, I ended up getting this Vizier Theory palette. This is the purple one. Haven't played around with this one yet, but definitely interested to see if I feel the same way I do about this formula as I do the Petit Pro 3. So first we have the Master Palette by Mario, which I absolutely love. I'm so happy that I got my hands on this. I'm currently trying to pan this shade. I love this palette. I think it's so beautiful, and even though it's neutral, I freaking love it. Again, such a good one for work days. A good one for travel too if you just like neutral looks. I think that this is awesome. I love that it provides you with warm tones, but then you also have this cool toned brown too and some other cool toned shades. So really do love this palette, and so glad that I was able to buy this. Then we have Modern Renaissance, cult classic, love it. Recently did a look using Venetian Red for the first time, and I loved the look that I created with that. I was super impressed, super surprised. I've always been intimidated by that shade, but really liked it. Want to play around with this one a little bit more lately. This is one that has just kind of been sitting for a while. Need to pull this into a Shop My Stash. Then we have the ever famous Subculture. I haven't gotten a lot of use out of this just because it is one of the harder ones to use. Obviously, I played around with it a little bit. I do like it. I love this electric shade as well as this cube shade. I think those are really fun shades that they included, but yeah, again, I haven't used this one that much just because it is a more difficult formula to work with. Then I have Prism, which I've spent a ton of time with already this year. I'm currently trying to pan this shade right here, but I've gotten so much use out of other shades in this palette as I've been pulling it to work on this shade. I've just been inspired by some of the other shades in here. This is another formula that's not the easiest to work with, but I think the color story is super fun in this one, so I've really been enjoying my time with Prism this year. Then we have Soft Glam, which is probably my favorite out of the bunch. I just love the warm toned color story in here along with all the shimmers that they included. I think that they just did such a knockout job when they thought about what they were going to include for shades in this palette. I probably could have done without Tempura, but other than that, I love everything else. I love this mulberry shade. I love the Soft Glam palette. Then we have Novena, which I also really do love. I think that this is such a fun palette. And again, I've had so much fun with purples this year, so this has been really fun to try and pull in and try and incorporate. I think this drama shade is so unique. This like shimmery purple I love. And then I love just the neutrals that you're left with at the bottom. I love that they included those. So another palette that I really do love. I love ABH. I swear, even if the color story doesn't speak to me, I just collect ABH palettes. In fact, I actually wasn't going to buy the Sultry palette because I felt like the color story just seemed boring, but then I just looked at it more and more, and I felt like, one, I just needed to round out my ABH collection, and two, as I've played with this, I've really enjoyed everything that I've come up with. It's awesome for me because I do really enjoy more neutral toned eyeshadows, but it's been fun to incorporate some of these cooler toned eyeshadows into my looks, and all of the shimmers in here are just standout beautiful shimmer shades. So I actually really have been getting along with the ABH Sultry palette as well. And then finally we have the Riviera palette. This is the newest palette to my collection. I just got this the other day. Haven't even played around with it. I was so excited when I saw the teaser pictures for this. I thought it was such a fun palette. This is the first eyeshadow palette I bought this year, and just so fitting that it's an Anastasia Beverly Hills palette. I'm so excited to start playing around with this. Although I am a little bit intimidated, I just also cannot wait. So after that, you guys, that concludes my palette collection. We have an empty blanket. Those are all the palettes in my collection. Thank you guys if you stuck around to watch this in its entirety. Leave me a comment down below letting me know your top 3 and bottom 3 palettes that you have ever tried. Other than that, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I hope you'll consider doing so before you go, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye!